By now, you're probably getting pretty used to the idea that PHP has this whole library of built-in functions that'll do all sorts of useful things for you when you call them. We've seen functions like the date function that'll get the current date in whatever format you want it. We've seen functions like MySQLi connect and MySQLi query that will connect to and send instructions to your database server. And there are tons and tons of other functions that you can read about whenever you need them. But it turns out that you can also write functions yourself. Whenever you need to do something that PHP can do, but typing the code to do it every time is getting a bit tedious, you can just write your own function so that anytime you need to do that thing, you can just call your function, as if it was a built-in feature in the PHP language. So let me show you an example of that. In the before folder for today, you'll find a calculate-area folder, and inside that we have these three files. I'm going to open up my text editor, and let's take a look at the index.php file to start with. This file, we can see here that we're going to be calculating a value for this variable called area. And then my output.html.php template in this folder, if I open that up, you can see all it does is outputs the value of that area variable. So in this example, we will be calculating the area of something. And let's say that we're writing a site where that is a common thing to do, calculating the areas of things. I'm talking in the geometric sense here. The area of a rectangle is the width of that rectangle times its height. That's its area, and that's what we want to be calculating here. So let's say we knew that the area of something, the width of something was 3 and the height of that thing was 5. We could calculate its area by doing 3 times 5, semicolon, and saving it, and there, we would be done. But say our math skills weren't too good and we couldn't always remember how to calculate the area of something, and maybe we have to do this a whole lot, and writing out this multiplication every single time would be a bit tedious. So let's have a function that calculates areas instead. If that function were built into PHP, we would hope to be able to call it something like this: area 3 and 5. So this is the function area, and we pass it 2 arguments, the number 3 and the number 5. It takes those values, calculates the area of the rectangle with that width and height, and returns that value to us so that we can then store it in this area variable. But PHP doesn't have a function called area. We're going to write it ourselves. And as soon as you start writing your own functions, it's especially convenient to have those functions stored in a separate PHP file. This PHP file, unlike the includes that we've looked at so far, includes that when you call them, they do something. Either they output a piece of the page or they do something like connect to your database. These include files will just be libraries of functions. So when we load this include file, it will add all of these extra functions to PHP, and then we can use them if and when we want to. So what I'm going to do is put at the top of this file an include once statement, and we only need to use include once here because we only need to load these functions once. If we've already loaded these functions somewhere else in our code, then we don't want PHP loading them again. That would be redundant. We only need to load them once. This is the difference between an include file that does something, so you always want to include it when you use it, and an include file that adds some features to PHP. You only need to include those once because then you get to use those features when you need them later on. So I'm going to call this include file area function.inc.php. So it's a PHP include file again, and I'm calling it area function because it will contain my area function. So let me save that change. And if I go to the third file in this folder, which is area function.inc.php, right now it's an empty PHP script. So here is where we create our area function. And you've never done this before, so follow along. Whenever you want to create a function of your own, you start by writing the word function. And that tells PHP, this isn't a statement for you to run. This is a special thing. This is a function declaration. I'm declaring a new function that you need to know about because I'm going to be using it. So the next thing you do is give your function a name. And we know we want our function to be named area. And then after the name, you put these parentheses again, just as if you were calling the function. Only this time, instead of putting the arguments that you want to pass to that function, you put variable names. So the first one will be width, and the second one will be height. So when this area function is called, the first argument that is passed to it will be stored in this width variable. And the second argument that is passed to it will be stored in this height variable. So now, once we have defined our function and what arguments it takes, now we need to say what this function does. So we go to a new line and we open up curly braces, the same ones we use for if statements and while loops, those sorts of things. Only this time what these curly braces will contain is the series of statements that is run every time my function is called. So what this function will do when it is called, it will simply calculate an area and return it. So I will do a return statement, and this is another type of statement that we haven't seen before. It's only really useful inside of a function. But what it does is says, when this function is called, return some value back to the code that is calling this function. And in this case, the value we want to return back is the width times the height. Semicolon. So this single statement will calculate the width, it will multiply the width and the height to calculate the area, and it will return that. So I'll save that change. And now back here in index.php, I am including that file, that function library. So that creates this area function, which I can then use here, passing it these two values. And what gets returned is that area, and we would expect 5 times 3 to be 15. And then we output that. So I'll save that change, and now let's go to my browser and see if this works. If I do calculate area, that's the folder that contains my example. There we go. The area is 15. So what you will do over time is you will build up this group of PHP functions that you carry along with you in your career that you find really useful because they do common tasks for you without you having to type out the whole code. Instead of having to type out the whole code to do something, all you have to do is connect your function library to your PHP script using an include once statement, and then you can use those functions inside your scripts as if they were built-in features in MySQL, in PHP. So the next thing we will be doing is looking at some more useful functions that you'll want to have with you in your function library from this point forward.